This is NPR News.
And it's on WNYC. Marketplace is coming here next in just a moment. Tonight on the show, the aftermath of Silicon Valley Bank's failure has some people asking, are the country's biggest banks the only safe place to keep your money? How too big to fail took on a new meaning. That's on Marketplace tonight, coming your way in just a moment at 6:30. More All Things Considered at 7. 84 degrees, sunny right now in the city. It's going to stay clear tonight. We'll have a low of about 60. Tomorrow again, sunny, temperatures in the mid-80s. It's WNYC at 6:30.
WNYC supporters include Bases Independent Schools with campuses in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Learn more about their globally inspired pre-K to grade 12 curriculum at an April open house. More at basesindependent.com/WNYC.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by JLL, a leasing, management, investment, and technology company dedicated to creating a brighter future for the world of commercial real estate. JLL.com. See a brighter way.
Banks. Banks, 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 banks. And milk. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by SoFi. SoFi Insights helps members track all of their money all in one place. SoFi Insights provides credit score monitoring, spending breakdowns, financial insights, and more. Learn more at SoFi.com. SoFi.com. Get your money right.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizdal. It is Thursday today, the 13th day of April. Good as always to have you along, everybody. The macroeconomic word of the day today is bellwether. The good people at Merriam-Webster define it as an indicator of trends, which is right up our alley, trying as we do on this program to spot trends in this economy. Anyway, the economic bellwethers we've got in mind today are banks. The big ones, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and PNC, which are going to report earnings tomorrow, details of which are going to be combed over even more minutely than usual, given the failure last month of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature, and the overall banking unease right now. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman gets us going today.
As we begin to dissect earnings reports tomorrow, the first big question will be, after the unexpected bank failures of March, can we expect more trouble? CFRA research analyst Ken Leon says, for the mega banks, there's not too much to worry about.
We're going to see stable financial results in line or better than expected.
He says these banks have actually fattened up as depositors pulled their money out of smaller banks following last month's bank runs. And, says Matt Colliar at Moody's Analytics, they face less financial risk than their smaller peers.
Bigger banks are lending to your larger corporations and have a little bit more confidence there. They've also been under tighter regulatory scrutiny, so they're more confident in their balance sheets.
So what about the mid-sized and smaller banks? They now face more regulatory scrutiny, possibly higher interest rates, and uncertainty. Quincy Crosby at LPL Financial says they're definitely getting more cautious.
The biggest concern for the economy right now is whether or not I want to say crisis, but let's call it the stress in the banking sector has led to a material slowdown in lending to small businesses and consumers.
Back to the question we started with, can we expect more bank runs and federal bailouts?
So if I knew that answer, you'd be talking to me from like an island in the Caribbean.
Economist Gerald Cohen was actually in his office at the Kenan Institute at UNC Chapel Hill today, where he said no one can know for sure whether more bank failures are on the horizon, but
I'm cautiously optimistic that this is not going to turn into the global financial crisis.
Because federal regulators guaranteed all deposits and provided liquidity, he says, and because businesses and households are in pretty decent shape financially. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
Banks are not, of course, the only bellwether in this economy. We've said a time or two, I believe, that the labor market is kind of important as well. So we're going to pause here to make note of this morning's report on first-time claims for unemployment benefits. Yes, it is notoriously volatile, but still, it did move up last week to 239,000 people freshly out of work. That is the first increase in 3 weeks, which is why we're mentioning it. The other reason is that a gradually softening labor market would be exactly what the Fed is looking for. On Wall Street today, traders opted to find the good news in the economic data. We will have the details when we do the numbers. So as Mitchell said, we're going to start getting quarterly bank earnings tomorrow. The Wall Street biggies, all the names you're familiar with. And while we wait, here are a couple of data points perhaps of interest. At the end of last year, the 4 biggest banks in this economy, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, had more than $9 trillion in assets. That's equivalent to about 35% of gross domestic product. So while you think about that, listen to this.
We have seen a flight from regional and community banks to quote-unquote too big to fail banks.
That was New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez during a banking committee hearing at the end of last month, using a phrase you have probably heard a lot in the past 10 or 15 years.
Really, it's a misnomer. It really should be too essential to fail.
To me, it means the consequences of allowing the financial institution to fail in an uncontrolled way are too significant to bear.
It can trigger systemic effects throughout the economy.
That's Kathleen Day. She's a lecturer at Johns Hopkins. Eric Hilt, he's a professor at Wellesley. And Carola Friedman, she's at Northwestern. The trio that we go to from time to time to help us put our economic present into historical context. Today, Too Big to Fail, the origin story. Too big to fail is something we talked about a lot during and after the financial crisis in 2008-2009. But it really entered the public policy vernacular back in the 1980s.
In Washington today, federal banking officials formally announced their plans to rescue the Continental Illinois Bank. It's the biggest bank bailout in history.
Continental Illinois was a commercial bank that grew extremely rapidly in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Continental, the nation's 9th largest bank, has been bled almost to death.
Its business was focused on loans to Latin American countries and also loans to the oil and gas business, and both of them suffered significant downturns around that time.
There were even rumors that the bank might fail.
Some of what happened with Continental Illinois is going to sound familiar. Here again is Kathleen Day.
Its tentacles were deep and vast in a very key sector.
Continental Illinois was deep in oil and gas, and as we know, Silicon Valley Bank had its tentacles all over tech.
And very much like SVB today, Continental Illinois had a very large fraction of depositors holding above $100,000. So they were not actually fully insured by deposit insurance.
So when it began to realize losses, the depositors of Continental Illinois began to run on the bank.
The government was afraid that if Continental failed, it would trigger a chain reaction of other bank failures.
And the government had to intervene.
When the FDIC stepped in and promised to support even uninsured depositors, does that sound familiar? Well, back then there was a lot of debate about moral hazard.
This is one of the lessons of American capitalism in the last quarter of the 20th century. If you're big enough, you'll be rescued by the government if you get into trouble.
You can imagine what happened next, right? Congress. In the fall of 1984, up to Capitol Hill went some of the people involved in Continental Illinois for 3 days of hearings.
Nobody likes bailouts, right?
We don't like it. It stinks. We have to hold our nose. But
if there is no intervention, we might see negative consequences at an aggregate macro level.
And there is a moment in the hearing transcript, we don't have a recording, but there's a moment where a congressman from Connecticut says this.
With all due respect, I think seriously, we have a new kind of bank.
It is called Too Big to Fail, TBTF, and it is a wonderful bank.
Wonderful, of course, comes with air quotes there, but there it is, right? Too big to fail, TBTF, in the congressional record in 1984.
But if you go back farther in financial history, it's clear that there have been institutions that are too big to fail or too significant to fail.
We can trace back government interventions to specific financial institutions to centuries back, all the way to the 1300s.
Here's why you need to understand this.
The lesson is that the problem of too big to fail is not one that's easy to solve.
They knew even then, like way before Continental Illinois, that bank failures were unique, that they posed interesting questions about who should survive and who should be bailed out and who would pay for it.
It's very, very hard to regulate these issues away.
Even after Continental Illinois in 1984 and then after Dodd-Frank in 2008, we still haven't figured this out.
It is a constant race to try to figure out where the risks are in the system and to try to address them, but it is not a very easy race.
The time to really think about the too big to fail, what I like to call too essential to fail issue, is when the sun is shining.
You know, whatever legal reforms you want to try to put in place to prevent them, they're not going to hold up in a dire emergency.
Because when there's a crisis, the liability of having such huge institutions comes home to roost. So you really should be thinking of these questions when there's not a crisis, but it's hard to get people's attention.
Attention will be paid to the Federal Reserve's report on SVB. That has been promised to us by May the 1st. Any guesses, by the way, on whether it is going to use the phrase too big to fail? Thanks once again to Kathleen Day at Johns Hopkins, Corolla Friedman at Northwestern, and Eric Hilt at Wellesley. We got the latest update on wholesale prices today, the Producer Price Index by name. Last month, the PPI dropped 0.5%. That's the biggest decrease in 3 years, which could, I say again, could mean some inflation easing ahead. There has been a slew of data out this week. CPI yesterday, told you about that. Wholesale inflation today, retail sales tomorrow. So we decided to do a survey of our own, some of our retail regulars, to see how things are going for them. Today's dispatch comes from Kalina Bruce. She's of the Noir Luxe Candle Company up in Seattle.
We are consistently seeing new folks come in to create candles, and we also are seeing a lot of folks come in to just purchase candles or buy gifts or just to shop small. So that's been really awesome. Staffing at Noir Luxe has been consistent. We actually have a couple of staff members who are coming up on their 1-year mark with us, which is really awesome. We're continuing to seek more staff members, really to just kind of support the ongoing requests that are coming up. Our biggest challenge right now, I think, is just kind of keeping up with the demand, I would say. So I want to continue to think about, ways to improve our systems and our internal practices. Like, how can we get those costs down? And I think one challenge is storage. I'm getting things delivered to my house, and my husband, thank goodness for him, is helping me bring everything in and set up our garage with all these things. And then I have to kind of lug everything to the shop as we need it. So that's something that can be a little bit of a challenge. In the next few months, I would love to see Noir Luxe candles on the shelves at different retail partners across the country. That would be the dream.
Kalina Bruce, living the dream, or trying to anyway, at Noir Luxe Candle Company up in Seattle. Coming up.
So they're pitching it as the OG sports drink.
Milk with a workout. I don't know. First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial is up 383 today, 1.1%, 34,029. The Nasdaq jumped 236 points, 2%, 12,166. The S&P 500 up 54 points, 1.33%, 41.46. The proximate cause for all that PPI report. Bank stocks rallied ahead of all those earnings reports tomorrow that Mitchell was telling us about. Wells Fargo jumped about 1.2%. J.P. Morgan Chase up 0.4%. PNC gained 1.4% as well. Citigroup up about 0.8%. Gold hit a high for the year today. A troy ounce of gold now costs about $2,055. Bond prices down. Yield on the 10-year Treasury note up 3.45%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by ChargePoint. ChargePoint lets electric vehicle drivers charge wherever they are, at home, at work, or on the go. Learn more at ChargePoint.com. ChargePoint, driving a better way. And by Domo, the data experience platform innovator that unites IT's need for governance and business users' need for access. With Domo, companies get agile data experiences that spark the curiosity that underpins business impact. More at Domo.com.
Support for WNYC comes from the Met. Now on view, Cecily Brown, Death in the Maid, presents dynamic paintings, drawings, and sketches from the artist's 25-year career. Museum admission is pay as you wish for New Yorkers. Learn more at metmuseum.org.
WNYC is independent public media, here to serve you and our entire community. We are listener-supported and proud of it. Financial contributions from listeners like you make our work possible. When you give to WNYC, you're helping to fund the news you count on and the conversations yet to come. Become a member today. Text the letters WNYC to 70101 or visit WNYC.org and click on Donate.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. Coming up in the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, more than 90% of police precincts in New York City have cruisers or personal vehicles of officers parked in places they shouldn't be. We're going to hear the author of that study at 7.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Risdall. Even if you yourself haven't actually been in the market for a new car the past couple of years, you probably know that dealers have been in the driver's seat, so to speak. High demand, record low inventories. You remember the chip shortage, right? And presto, big markups and no leverage for buyers. Today, though, we did get a sign that things are starting to swing back toward the consumer's direction. Last month, for the first time in almost 2 years, the average new car sold for less than the sticker price by $171, give or take. That's according to Kelley Blue Book. Marketplace's Savannah Marr has that one.
A new car's sticker price is set by the manufacturer, but buyers can haggle that price down or dealers can mark it up depending on market conditions, says auto analyst David Whiston with Morningstar.
Lately, with the chip shortage, some dealers have, depending on your perspective, either been utilizing the free market efficiently or ripping consumers off.
A year ago, the average new car buyer was paying close to $1,000 over sticker price. But with that semiconductor chip shortage easing, some automakers are ramping up production, says Rebecca Rudzeski, a research business manager with Cox Automotive.
With inventory up, dealers don't have the pricing power that they once did maybe 6 months ago.
She says new vehicles are still much more expensive than before the pandemic, at an average of just over $48,000. But more cars on the lot means modest discounts are making a comeback. Jessica Caldwell with the car site Edmunds says dealers are hoping discounts will incentivize purchases despite high interest rates, which will drive up buyers' monthly payments.
We're having consumers really stop and think, do I really need a new vehicle? You know, cars are very expensive right now. I'm not sure what's happening with the economy. I'm a little worried about my job.
David Whiston with Morningstar is one of those consumers sitting on the sidelines of the vehicle market. His household could use a second car, but he says it's not urgent.
I just decided I'm going to wait for a much better buyer's market. You can call me cheap if you want.
He's hoping that more favorable market will come late this year or early next, whenever the chip shortage finally comes to an end. I'm Savannah Marr for Marketplace.
right, we're going to do a little cause and effect now. The cause being the Russian invasion of Ukraine more than a year ago. The effects being almost everything, upsets in global security to disruptions in global trade. Specifically for us right now, the trade in Russian petroleum products. There are Western sanctions on Russian energy in place, yes, but other countries are still buying it. They're just farther away than Russia's main European market used to be. And that is causing some headaches for everybody else who wants to and needs to ship energy commodities across the water. Marketplace's Lily Jamali covers energy for us.
If you thought oil markets were volatile, try shipping, whose extremes Nicholas Watt, head of freight pricing at Argus Media, likens to surge pricing on Uber.
If you're leaving a football game or a concert, you've got a lot of people that want to take an Uber, and you'll notice, it's 3 times higher the cost than I would normally expect.
But you still have to get home.
So you pay it. And it's the same sort of thing with tankers.
Demand for tanker services has surged as sanctions have forced Russia to sell a whole lot less oil to Europe and more to other parts of the world.
That flow is now largely going to India or to China, so that's a longer haul route.
As a result, the tankers that move it are tied up for longer, and that's affecting the entire global market for those tankers. Over the last 2 months, the average cost that producers pay to ship fuel and petroleum has more than doubled. Dylan Simpson, freight analyst at Vortexa, says we can't count on a lot of new tankers to ease the crunch.
Until I think about 2025, there's going to be decreasing growth in the fleet size globally.
Builders are keeping busy producing other kinds of ships, says Jason Miller, interim chairperson of Michigan State's Department of Supply Chain Management.
New capacity under construction in the ocean space. It's tied up right now in building container ships as well as liquefied natural gas ships,
which are all the rage right now. So for now, it will be older tankers moving Russian fuel those longer distances, and that'll have climate impacts for a sector that Miller says is already one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. I'm Lily Jamali for Marketplace.
You remember the Got Milk ad campaign of the 90s and early 2000s? Celebrities of various stripes with those milk mustaches? Well, Big Milk is trying to find new customers, Gen Z specifically, which never really jumped on the milk bandwagon. Kim Severson is a national food correspondent for the New York Times, and she wrote about Big Milk's new marketing campaign the other day. Kim, thanks for coming on.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. So let's talk milk. First of all, before we get into what Big Milk is doing, I want to know why Gen Z is not drinking milk.
That's a big problem. It's a big problem. Yeah. It's cultural, it's social, it's about animal rights. So, first of all, imagine this is a generation that was raised on Obama-era nutrition standards. So at school, they drank low-fat milk, or no fat milk at all. Mm-hmm. These are kids who were raised by people who probably had almond milk in the fridge, the first sort of oat milk, almond milk generation. Yeah. So milk's had a lot of competition. Water's actually been a big competitor for milk for this generation. It's quite a dilemma for Big Milk.
So milk did, though, in the 90s-ish, 2000s-ish, they had that home run of a campaign with Got Milk.
Right.
So what are they doing now?
Well, they've shifted it to you're gonna need milk, which is...
Gonna need? I don't know if that rolls trippingly off the tongue.
And they're trying to reposition milk as a sports drink. And
seriously?
There have been some studies that show chocolate milk has helped athletes in their recovery period after a workout. And milk does have a lot of calcium and other nutrients, and so they're pitching it as like the OG sports drink. So that's one.
But the last thing you want in your stomach, either before or after workout, is maybe this is just me, but is a big glass of milk just sitting there, and you get that taste in your mouth, and blah.
Well, see, you're part of the problem. You're not buying, the storyline.
Well, so look, so I, on occasion when there are chocolate chip cookies in my house, I have a glass of skim milk, but otherwise, I do other things to hydrate myself. And I guess the question is you're gonna need milk gonna work for big milk?
That's a very good question. I mean, they are, getting influencers. They're going to TwitchCon, gaming conventions. They're getting gaming superstars like Mr. Beast and Preston Arsment to go on Minecraft and talk about dairy farming and do Minecraft cows. And they're throwing everything at it.
Minecraft cows, you say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The dairy industry has sponsored some Minecrafters, and they talk about cows and dairy farming, and then they have introduced 7 little Minecraft cows that do different things. But I think the thing that may ultimately save milk is just the contrarian nature of young people. So, it's not going to be too long until someone decides actually drinking milk is cool. There's a little bit of a, I don't know, you could call it milk core, this idea of, it's people are more interested in farming, the flip phone, mending their own clothes. There's a whole kind of vibe around that, and I think that's milk core. Could ultimately save milk.
I was interested to learn from this piece that you wrote, which is totally fascinating on a lot of levels. The milk consumption in this country has been in what you might call a secular decline since the end of the Second World War. I mean, this is not a new thing that milk has troubles.
Right. Milk consumption has been going down pretty steadily. However, dairy consumption's been going up. People love cheese. People love yogurt. It's just that glass of fluid milk.
So cheese and yogurt and all that jazz, that applies to Gen Z too, right? They're eating that?
Huge yogurt. Love fermented things.
Before we go, are you a milk drinker or no?
I am. I believe in whole milk. I like whole milk in my cappuccinos, friend. I'm not going to lie.
No, got to do it. Amen. My favorite Howard Schultz story ever, the guy who made Starbucks what it is that originally he wasn't going to let people use skim milk. And I'm like, wow, that's a gutsy move.
Yeah, no, I'm with him. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but that I do. I feel like we have to get you off the skim milk thing, Kai.
Yeah, you got to talk about that. Tell my wife about that. I go whole milk in the coffee, and it's a long story. No time for that. Kim Severson, she writes on food for the New York Times. Kim, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Final note on the way out today, which brings to mind a little bit of Greek mythology, the story of Sisyphus, condemned for eternity to roll a boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down every time. The modern day version of that comes to us from New York City, which has hired this week, and I am not making this up, its first director of rodent mitigation, rat czar, if you will. $155,000 per annum is the salary. The number of rats in New York City, a lot.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance with Snapshot. Learn more about Snapshot at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Snapshot not available in California, North Carolina, or from all agents. And by EquityZen Securities, LLC. With EquityZen funds, accredited investors can invest in the private companies shaping the future before they go public at equityzen.com/radio.
All right, we're going. Here, though, is your moment of economic context in which men once again prove themselves to be jerks. Saw this in Axios, new data from the Pew Research Center that shows that even as more women make more money in their marriages, not equal pay, mind you, I believe we've talked about the gender pay gap, yes? But as more women make more money, their husbands still spend an average of 3.5 more hours on leisure than they do, and those women spend about 2 more hours on caregiving and give or take 2.5 more hours on housework than their husbands do. Come on, right? John Buckley, John Gordon, Rick Carr, Diantha Parker, Amanda Petra, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. Amir Babawi is the managing editor. I'm Kai Ryssdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.